I just couldn't continue living my life as male anymore. And I had to go forward with my transition. I had to really find that courage. And it was hard to find that courage. But I also realized I hit a point of no return.
This is the Transparency Podcast Show with hosts Shelby Chang and Michelle Herman from Long Beach, California, where we bring you life transformation stories, business, investment, personal development, entertainment, and more.
Welcome back to Transparency Podcast Show. Hi, Michelle. How are you doing?
Hi, Shelby.
I'm going to introduce you a friend of mine.
Yay.
Her name is Tawni, and I know her about almost 10 years ago.
Nice.
And when I met her, she just started kind of exploring herself in Mary's, Hamburger Mary's,
yeah.
in Long Beach. And so I technically see her from beginning to now. So it's very incredible journey, and I'm very proud of her. So Today we're gonna have her come on the show and share her experience and her stories.
Great.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Hi, Tawni.
Hi, Shelby.
Hi, Tawni. It's great to meet you.
Great to meet both of you. Well, I've known, Shelby said, I've known Shelby for a while, and she's an awesome friend.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I've seen you online for years, but it's one of those things how, we see each other, but we always don't connect in person or directly, but, it's part of our overall community. So it's great to see you kind of in person.
Well, isn't it nice to connect after you kind of know the Facebook person?
Yes,
and
exactly.
We actually, and we connect like, oh my gosh, there's a real person there.
Exactly
wow.
Right. Yes. I think we often kind of watch each other's journey and pick things that apply to us and what would work for us, what wouldn't work for us. But sometimes we don't get, or a lot of times we don't get that opportunity to meet face to face. So that's one of the things I like about doing this podcast. So thanks for inviting me to do this.
Of course. So, Tawni, we're going to start off learning your journey from the very beginning. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, tell us about how you feeling like your difference and how do you discover your true self?
Wow. Okay. So I'll just say you can figure it out. I'm 62 years old. Wow. Okay. And so maybe I came from that generation where, when I grew up, there was no internet, there was no nothing, there's nothing available information-wise about people like us.
Right.
And so I think that I lived a life where I always felt this difference. I always experienced it from a young age, but our reality was so different than that. And I ended up living a life trying to mold myself into what I thought I should be.
Exactly.
Based on other people's expectations, family background, my upbringing, all that kind of stuff. And so I did not come to terms or did not, shall we say, leave the closet until I was in my early 50s.
Right.
And I would say that in that time period, I did, I worked in information technology since the early 80s, since like 1980, believe it or not. And so because of that, I could see people express themselves in community, through all the incantations, before there's Facebook, there's message boards. Oh God, what was the other? Anyway, I don't want to go through that history, but the long story short is I used to live vicariously through others.
Yes.
I used to look at other trans people on, on the internet, on social, and I used to do it from the most intense relief from my own dysphoria, but yet at the same time being closeted for all those years, being closeted for so long, that took an enormous toll on me. I think on the other hand, to finally get that courage to take those first steps out of the closet, which is in this club scene that we mutually experienced, was like, oh my gosh, that was the most unbelievable experience ever. Because it's like, there's like this need. It's kind of like the need to me was almost like, a pitcher of water in a parched desert. All of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, for me to realize I think I was married for over 20 years, 24 years. And when I first came out to these trans clubs and trans events, it was like the emotions were overwhelming, and first to present as myself, and even to learn, like, even where I lived in a community in Los Angeles, Torrance, which by its nature was kind of a little bit more conservative bedroom community.
Right.
So all of a sudden to find out, like, oh my God, there's people next door to me, like me. I just couldn't even, it was. So I think it was just almost, in terms of my senses, to go to a club and freely express myself, and yes, with a lot of drinks. Oh my,
always helps.
That was powerful. It was, thankfully we had that venue to express ourselves.
Yes, I started with that club too, and I actually found the club by accident. Someone took me there, and then once I kind of like your situation, once I walk in, I just feel, I belong here. Somehow, I don't know why.
People like me.
Yeah, so that's why. Because Michelle just came out about 2 years ago.
Just over 2 years. At age 52.
Yes. And she's kind of the newer, I'll call it newer generation transition girls. They don't actually have to go to those clubs.
Yes, I never did.
Yeah, I found we interviewed some. They are just recently came out, and they just transition and then headed to the blend into the society.
I will say,
away.
I've driven by Hamburger Mary's very slow a lot pre-transition.
Okay.
But I never went in, and I basically watched you guys online, because I think in the 80s is when the advent of the internet and, able to have our own computers, and then watching other stories for those years, I think really saved my life, because it gave me hope, even though I never thought I would transition based on my family, my career, my religious upbringing. But I was able to see that as actually possible, which helped me sustain and not end up unaliving myself.
Yeah, a very similar experience, maybe just a little bit different vehicle.
Right. So,
but I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. I was gonna ask you, because you mentioned about when you came out, you were still in a marriage. Can you share that experience? Because you say similarity. Michelle might be able to reflect.
Sounds like we might have a lot in common with this.
On that part.
Yeah, it's okay. So, like I said, I was married for 24 years before I really got the courage to leave the closet. And, I think, how did I do it? My wife at the time, who is now my ex, at the time, she was out of town for 3 or 4 weeks. And that's like, oh boy, I'm gonna try this out. Yes. I'm taking this for a test ride. And then all my friends, and many of them, Shelby knows, but there was one lady who really encouraged me to leave the closet, who I'm forever indebted to her. It was the Emmy, who Emmy. Wow. And I think she said something to me when I was just closeted online, exploring myself, and it never left me. She's like, what's going to be, what are you waiting for? And what's going to be your excuse next month? Right. And it's like, oh my God. Yes. So my wife was out of town at the time, and I took the opportunity to, engage a makeup artist, help with clothing, present, do the whole event, come back home. And, I think the way, once you do an act like that, you present in public for the first time with the gender to which you identify or that you're figuring out, that is truly an irrevocable act. I didn't understand it at the time.
Right.
In terms of my relationship with my marriage is, when my wife at the time returned back from, being out of town, I got up that courage to express to her me at the time. And at the time I was just saying, I'm just more of a cross-dresser. I need to do this on the weekends. Yeah. And I would say it's kind of for us, I desperately wanted to stay together with her. Mm-hmm. I mean, I really, really, really wanted to make it work, because I was very invested in the marriage.
Right.
And, well, so
a lot of years.
And yeah, and so was she, in all honesty. But at a certain point, it's kind of like I left the closet in a way. And my wife at the time, she kind of went into the closet about me. And so she started suffering a lot. And she started having psychosomatic issues and stress issues because of me. And so it was so intense. At some point, Shelby, or to both of you, at some point, I think my own well-being started declining rapidly. And it really, well, I can talk about this. It's a hard topic. My well-being started, I started becoming so unhealthy because I was experiencing this difference between male and female in my brain, or what we would call gender dysphoria. I was experiencing it to such an extreme and such profound levels of panic attack, and dysphoria attack, that at the end of 2015, I became suicidal. I became, I had a moment where I literally wanted to act on it. I made a plan. I started to execute and to do it, which is inconceivable. But thankfully, we can call it whatever you want to call it, divine intervention. That I didn't really want to do it. It's a cry for help. You could use all these things. And thankfully, I had the right people in my life. And thankfully, I was working with a therapist at the time. I took a pause. I didn't follow through with it. But the severity of the attacks made me realize that I just couldn't continue living my life as male anymore. And I had to go forward with my transition. I had to really find that courage. And it was hard to find that courage. But I also realized I hit a point of no return. And the point that I would hit that point so severely, on the one hand, I don't want to see us go through, I don't want to see people like us have to go through what I went through. But on the other hand, as I got better and better, it became a gift because it made me understand that there's only one way forward, and that's to be myself. And I could not go backwards. I couldn't go back to who I was. I couldn't go back to a life as that dude, as it were. And then as I went forward, really, I made the decision to start the hormonal replacement therapy, HRT. And then about 6 months later, you start that, you slowly ramp up to it, and then it ramps up into, a very full dosage, which creates the transition. Once I made that decision is when my wife at the time said, I want a divorce. And I don't, and oh no. I would say, and as a point of personal honesty, I think before all of this and before me coming to terms with myself, my marriage actually, from my point of view and from how I dealt with it, I can't speak for her, but for me, it kind of became my codependent validation. I'm okay as a dude because look at me, I got a good marriage, a beautiful wife, a house, a blah, 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 blah.
Makes sense.
And at a certain point, that no longer had relevance. But in compassion towards her, she married a guy. She didn't marry.
Exactly.
But us detaching from all of that, that was really hard. It was mutually hard. It's hard maybe the insecurity and the vulnerability is extremely high for me. So it's hard to share that with friends, even in community or maybe a few, because it's it requires a lot of capacity to go with it. And maybe at that moment in my life, I didn't have the capacity. I was just oh my God, female hormones. WTF do I do with this? And then it's I'm getting divorced. What do I do with this?
100%.
And it's oh my gosh, my job just laid me off.
Wow.
What do I do with this? You know, this is a lot. This is a lot to deal with. How do I deal with this? You know? That's.
Thank you for sharing. And I think it is important to capture the beauty out of our journey, even in the difficult parts, and maybe even especially in the difficult things. What was the sense of hope that you had that got you from the point of not going through with unaliving yourself, walking through the trauma of, breaking up with a really good partner, walking through the trauma of coming out into a world that was not ready for you at that time, still? What was the sense of hope that got you through?
I mean, the sense of hope is seeing many of my sisters so far down, or many trans kind, meeting so many trans kind, and just, number one, seeing that it was possible. Because at that point, it's just like, I don't know if I can do it.
Right.
I don't know if I can do it, but I have to do it. So that gave me hope. Yeah. Second, the other thing that gave me hope is, yes, I was every week quite religiously seeing a gender therapist. And it kind of helped keep me on my path. Okay. And third, during this process, I started to develop some, I would call them like trusted friendships. Yeah. That those were the friends that I had that I could be vulnerable with. Okay. And so it's kind of a mixture of all those things. We need support. We need to advance our cause. We need to heal. And then we need that camaraderie together. And sometimes, what we do have to realize about the camaraderie, all of us have our really difficult stuff. We all have our trauma, our different, and so sometimes, for me, the hardest thing was understanding that as I went through the community, and I'm at a very raw point in my transition, that understanding, oh, by the way, though my bigger sisters are further along than I, they have their issues as well. Sure. I'm just more seeing it as like this, gold standard, like, oh my God, exactly, they're living full time. Right, yes. And they've had their surgeries and that's what I want to do and I don't have it and how am I going to do it? Right. But I think through all this time, I developed some very close friends, and those friendships ended up being really key. That's what really gave me the hope. Awesome. Because giving that hope is just knowing I had a home with the right people. We call them our adopted or extended, whatever you want to call it. If they did, yes, absolutely. But it plays a very important part. And I think it was there's no way I could do it without it. So I think in a way we're all kind of standing on each other's shoulders, or propping each other up, or falling backwards and going forward,
Exactly. Well said. Well said.
Yeah, I want to mention one thing because me and Tawni became so close. What she just mentioned is support, and everyone has their own traumas or depressions. So when I was in my depression, she was the only one came to my room at a time and knocked on my door. Oh. Yes. So I was very good. At that time, I feel so embarrassed of myself, ashamed. And I actually pushed her out. I said, I don't want to see anybody right now. Wow. But because of that, we built up a very strong friendship. Wow. And when she said she can share vulnerable, that's what we're still doing after all these years. Yes. Yeah. So I'm very, appreciate you doing that. So, give me hope at the same time too.
Yes, that was part of your hope.
Yeah, that's part of my hope because I couldn't see how, at that time, I couldn't see how I'm going to dig myself out of that depression.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Maybe we could pause here and just say, if you are in a place where you're thinking that you can't move forward, that you're stuck, there's no one exactly like you, you don't know what to do, there are people available. In the show notes, especially on YouTube, we'll put up all the hotline numbers to call, but also reach out to any of us, reach out to anyone in the community. I don't know that everybody would respond, but I think many will. And so please know that it can get better. Know that there are people like you that have gone through things. It may not be exactly the same, but some of the fundamentals are the same. And as we've been able to be there for each other, we want to continue to do that and expand our community, because the outside world is not going to really support us, so we have to support ourselves. And so reach out to someone. Look for a therapist. Look for a friend in your area, or just jump online with any of us, and don't give up hope.